Good morning, Suzanne.
Good morning.
Good morning, Dale.
Good morning.
Who's calling from 585953?
Oh, Carla.
Hi, Carla. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, Tom.
Morning, Sharon.
Morning, Tom.
Good morning.
Okay, now we
It's
can...
being recorded.
Good morning, everyone, and we welcome you to our Saturday morning Bible study. This morning is Saturday, January 20th, 2018. We are recording from the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent, Plainfield, New Jersey, the United States of America. And this morning, our moderator is Shardy from Pennsylvania.
Good morning. First, I'd like to read from Message to the Mother Church from 1902 by Mary Baker Eddy. Quote, Christian Science stills all distress over doubtful interpretations of the Bible. It lights the fires of the Holy Ghost and floods the world with the baptism of Jesus. It is this ethereal flame, this almost unconceived light of divine love, that heaven husbands in the first commandment. End quote.
Beautiful, thank you. Stills all distress over doubtful interpretations of the Bible.
So we should have absolutely no distress this morning.
Can all be at peace.
Afternoon and evening, too.
Right. Anyone else?
I think the burning is here again, ethereal flame. It just crossed my thought that it's a consecration again, mentioned before.
Don't get away from that purging.
Well, and that is what makes it the divine comforter, isn't it?
Yes.
Because it gives us, well, it doesn't give us, it does burn away all error. Leaves nothing left that could be of question.
Here we are, too, back to the first commandment, that heaven husbands in the first commandment. Beautiful. Okay.
Shall we go to the first question?
Yes.
Number one. Oh, first of all, the topic is stand fast in the Lord. And then number one, what is the covenant God made with Noah? And that's, we looked at Genesis 6:18.
Who would like to read that?
I can read it.
Thank you.
But with thee will I establish my covenant, and thou shalt come into the ark, thou and thy sons, and thy wife, and thy sons' wives with thee.
Thank you. And what is a covenant?
It's an agreement. It also it has a moral faculty to it. Something is required of you. This is between God and man, of course.
It's a promise. Thank you.
It's also a contract between two people, and it binds them together.
Thank you. Yeah, I read somewhere it makes a relationship between the two.
Well, and it's the same covenant that Moses wrote about later as well, right? Genesis and Deuteronomy. The covenant
Hello?
Yes.
is explained later on in the Bible, but science tells us it's the same covenant, isn't it?
Have you made a covenant with God?
Hello?
Hello, who's that?
Colin.
Who is it, please?
I'm sorry that I didn't realize how late it was, but my name is Carolyn, and I'm joining the study.
Welcome.
It's not late.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome. Glad you joined us.
We're on
you.
question number 1.
Okay.
We've had on our carousel the covenant that, what was it, Adam Dickey's father made?
Yeah, Nathaniel.
Nathaniel Dickey, which was sort of an example.
I think a covenant, I think of it as a sacred agreement.
Very much so.
Something is required of you. I mean, obedience.
Yes. It's not to be entered into lightly, in other words.
Definitely not. You wouldn't want to go back on your covenant with God. We've talked about it here before. Mr. Evans, the former practitioner here, he used to require that of his patients, that they make this covenant with God. And it's a good thought, a good suggestion. Making that covenant is what has helped me to stay in this church for as long as I have. The promise, it's the binding contract. You read the Nathaniel Dickey, you can get an idea of what that covenant was for him. It was very, very beautiful. Hereby Noah giving his total obedience to God. What was God going to do for him?
Save him
Right.
and his family.
And his family.
Mm-hmm.
Forever. Their seed forever.
True.
So this is the first time that the word covenant is used in the Bible. And it seems like from here on, there's just more and more coming out in the Bible as to what the covenant means.
Mm-hmm. Even into the New Testament.
Yeah, last week we had it about the new covenant. Our lesson. So did you want to tell us what the covenant means to you, Tom?
Well, there's a couple of different ways of looking at it. I mean, one is Noah and his family is going to go through something, it's hard to describe, something quite remarkable, This is, to me, what God's way of saying, I'm there with you through all this. Trust in me. Don't have any doubt. You're going to go through something that would be hard for anybody to describe if you could think about it, But just to trust God, and you're going to go through this. And so I think it's quite remarkable how the way the Bible is written, you have the covenant being talked about before the flood and after the flood, which we'll get to in our questions later today, So it helps show the continuity of God's promise to his people.
I think the covenant's also important because it gives you a foundation on which to stand and from which to go forth. And I'm thinking about the example of Noah here, where he went through the process of building the ark and enduring all of the criticism of those that obviously didn't hear the calling. Was safe in the ark for a period of 40 days, and during that time didn't know exactly when it was going to end. But one of the things that I get from this story is that error comes to an end, and the thing that endures are the things of God. And even though during the meantime error may put on quite an appearance, have various temptations, still that all comes to an end, and one thing does endure, and that is the things of God. And evidently Noah knew this from the beginning. Must have had a firm relationship with God before this whole thing started, but it just shows the outcome of it all.
Thank you. How long did it take to build the ark?
Well, I did some research, and it was 55 to 75 years, depending on when the children, the men, the boys that Noah his wife gave birth to, when they married. So they figure it was. I remember the length of it was a football field and a half, and it took him quite some time.
Think of that. I read it took 120 years, but I guess it was just somewhat speculation, but think of that in tenacity. Here people are mocking him, making fun of him. He's the only one who hears this voice. And he keeps for all these years. That's why and we'll talk more about it tomorrow, what Parthens wrote on the forum about people who have been able to endure. What an important quality that is. This endure to the end. That's why I love that beautiful prayer we say Saturday or Sunday morning by Mrs. Eddy, where she says, help me to endure to the end. It's not easy to maintain your course over long, not just months, years. Anybody can do it for weeks or months. Try it for years.
A test of faith, obedience, diligence, absolute giving it all for God.
Thank you. And those are all characteristics of Noah, aren't they? His faith, as Tom was saying, the trust to believe it. His obedience, it says, to the very last detail he built this boat, right? According to God's specifications. He heard God that clearly. And what did it say about Enoch and Noah?
They walked with God?
Yes, they walked with God. Do you? Mr. Evans' favorite song. Does anyone remember what his favorite song is?
Walk with God along the way, you know it is a holy day.
No? Bruce, do you remember?
Are we talking about hymn 418?
No, it's not a hymn. He used to play it on his sax, and he loved it. Just a closer walk with thee.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, it's beautiful.
Just a closer walk with thee. Maybe the quartet will sing that sometime. That was his favorite song. It used to make me cry any time I'd hear it, especially now that he's not here. It's a beautiful sentiment. Can you sing it, Bruce? I love to do this to Bruce.
Yes, I could, but I don't know if you guys want to hear it.
Let's sing the first.
Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. That's all I can remember right now.
Okay, well, thank you. It's a beautiful song, but think about it. Are you walking with God? Now, Noah walked with God before all this happened, didn't he?
Yep.
He didn't just scramble at the last minute to start walking with God. He wouldn't have heard God telling him these things if he hadn't walked with God. It's a highly desirable characteristic. So,
He wouldn't have had the opportunity to build the ark if he hadn't been walking with God.
But like Parsons said in his post about you working and waiting, Noah didn't wait and then work.
yeah. It's very important, and maybe this is a good time. Elizabeth wrote something very important about Noah. Do you have it, Elizabeth? Can you read it? The forum.
I do. Do you want me to read the whole thing? It's kind of long, but I will.
No, I would. It's long, but it's
Okay. I just said that Noah had such faith in God that he was able to swim against the stream of corruption that was around him. It was not easy to build the ark for years and years while everyone was probably mocking what he was doing, yet he forged ahead. He was so sure of God's presence that nothing else mattered than to be obedient to him. And then I found from McLaren's expositions, I thought this was a very beautiful quote. He said, "What beauty there is in that description of the isolated man passing lonely amid his contemporaries like a stream of pure water flowing through some foul liquid and untouched by it, and yet not alone in his loneliness because he walked with God. The less he found congenial companionship on earth, the more he realized God is by his side." The remarkable phrase, used only of Enoch and of Noah, implies a closer relation than the other expression, to walk before God. Communion, the habitual occupation of mind and heart with God, the happy sense of his presence, making every wilderness and solitary place glad because of him. And then it just reminded me of what Herbert Eustace says in Christian Science, It's Clear, Correct Teaching, Noah's Resolve, that is. He said, "You must arrive at the point where it would make no difference to you if there were not another Christian Scientist in the world. You must so understand Christian Science, and its truth must be so vital to you that you would be satisfied to be the only Christian Scientist if that were necessary."
That was beautiful. Thank you. So, all this week, now for the rest of your life, you ask yourself, are you having a closer walk with God? Are you aware of his presence? This is what enabled Noah to do what he did. And then also, because I hear it sometimes, are you willing to be the only Christian Scientist on earth? Some of you might feel like that in your family, where maybe they're mocking you or making fun or whatever. What should you do in situations like that?
Yes, what do you do when you are the only one that are the Christian Science, not only in your family, but at work as well?
Okay. What do you do?
Well, you don't give up.
Oh, no. Yeah, that's right.
But you continue.
You
Strong
love-
in the faith.
You love all the more. I mean, the Bible is full of people with that characteristic, isn't it? Elijah, Elisha, Jesus, Paul, all of the disciples.
And you can plant a seed here and there.
Most definitely.
And the stronger your connection with God, the more you can do what He wants you to do. Obviously, you're to do something. That's why you were there as the only one. So, only one. But with God, of course. So I think that, the more firmly planted you become in your faith and trust in God's presence all the time, you do what you're supposed to do there.
Thank you.
It's phrase, the Christ in me sees the Christ in them, the Christ in them sees the Christ in me, and then, it's seeing them correctly, and that don't accept that.
Thank you. That's very important, Lily. Thank you. You don't see them as ignorance, and you're preaching to ignorance. You see them already in the kingdom of God as Christian Scientists, because they are. There is nothing else. If God is all in all, there is nothing else. It's your misconception of them. Mrs. Evans used to tell us, because in those days, early days, husbands were never Christian Scientists. It was a church full of women. She would say, see your husband in church. You see them already there as accepting it and as knowing it, because somewhere inside them there is the truth. And that includes whether it's work or family or wherever. That's how you bring them in, by knowing they're already there. Otherwise, you are preaching down and thinking you're superior to them in some way, and you're not. And I used to feel that. I'm a Christian Scientist. I know this, but you don't. That gets you nowhere fast. That's why they resist it. And look for the ways that they are a Christian Scientist. Look for the good in them. Seek it out. Find it. Expect it. And then I thought, too, with Noah, he just quietly went about his business. He didn't get upset with anybody, not that we know of. He just kept building the ark. People were probably mocking him, saying terrible things. He didn't get offended. He was an example. They didn't like that example because that example was a rebuke to them. He was worshiping a God they obviously didn't believe in. He was hearing voices that they didn't hear. So they weren't too nice to him, and that sometimes does happen. But he didn't let it get him all upset, did he? Just quietly went about his business. And this was for 70, 80, 90, 100, 120 years. Good grief. And here he was predicting all this, saying, well, there's going to be a flood. There's not even any rain for all this time.
A lot of moments and days to be overcoming animal magnetism.
It is.
Mm-hmm. Quite an example of fidelity to truth and love. Had to have been very spiritually minded, otherwise it wouldn't have happened.
Wouldn't have happened. Would never have happened. And also, he never wished them ill. He didn't say, ha, 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 someday I'm going to be on an ark and you're all going to drown, ha, 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 ha. Sure, he never even thought such a thing.
It also means a lot to me that, obeying the specifics, because he was given, this should be so many cubics or this should be so many, the specific wood, everything, a specific direction, and he obeyed it all. So That means a lot.
It does, yes. Yes. Obedient in every detail. We should all hear God's voice so well that we adhere it to the very detail of what we are to be doing.
Must have been an awesome thing to think that you're building this huge ship, in other words, and then all the mankind that could not aboard that ship, including the rest of the animals, would perish. So the sole purpose was to do what? Was to rid the earth of all those people?
Well, and maybe that'll lead us to our next question.
In the meantime,
Okay.
how long did Mary Baker Eddy work to build her ark?
Well, it wasn't. No, that was my question. Was I'm not opposed to, because he obeyed God, and I'm not opposed to that. I was just thinking that if I was building the ark, I mean, if God had commissioned me to do that, I would really have thoughts about it as well. Of course, I would obey, but I would still have thoughts about that the only people that are going to be left are the ones that are going to go with me, and the animals, and the rest will be destroyed. And that's all I was thinking. I was just thinking, that's something it's a kind of an awesome thing to think that you're the only person, you and your family and whomever else are going to be left.
Sure, and the human mind will chew on things and evaluate things. And if you listen to the human mind, you might end up doing the wrong thing, huh?
Yeah, which is why Noah was given the job, because he didn't.
Right.
And I'm
Well,
sure
we know that.
Carolyn, we're going to go to the next question. Go ahead.
Okay. Question 2. What grieved the Lord at his heart? Genesis 5:6.
It's wickedness. Wickedness of mankind. Stubborn, rebellious, disobedient, all those.
And did it.
This is the language of the Scripture. Essentially, it's saying that this is the self-destruction of evil. If you do wrong, you're going to feel the pain and the penalty for it. So it gets resolved.
I also thought that everybody had the opportunity at that time to go to God and see what they needed to correct in their life. And if they changed their evil ways, just like we all learn lessons, we had the opportunity to change. And they had the opportunity that they could have changed and maybe been part of the ark. God just didn't wipe everything out. Thank you. I mean, goodness, they had 70, 80, 90, 100, 120 years to be thinking about all this. That was a good point. Thank you. So, and two, we learn, and it's in this week's lesson, that God is not a God of wrath and does not destroy. It is the era destroying itself, all the rebelliousness and wickedness and everything else destroys itself. God doesn't do it. And
I was going to say, he was speaking to all of them, too. They just weren't listening.
absolutely.
But this is an interesting, this is a good point, because this is where so many people interpret the Bible incorrectly. The author of Genesis said that the Lord grieved at the wickedness of man and the evil throughout all men. And he even regretted that he created man. So what kind of Lord is the author of Genesis here talking about? This is a human concept.
It's a human Lord.
A human concept of God. Is God capable of grieving?
No.
No. No.
Later in the Bible says he's purer eyes than to behold iniquity.
That's right.
Yeah, and Mrs. Eddy explains very clearly that God does not know evil, which is a tough concept for a lot of so-called Christian churches to accept.
Which is also why all of you should be very well familiar with Mrs. Eddy's, she called it her masterpiece, Unity of Good, which she explains this. And she says it's a topic we probably shouldn't discuss because it's such a deep topic, but on top of page 2, she says, the scriptures declare that God is too pure to behold iniquity, Habakkuk, but they also declare that God pitieth them who fear him, that there is no place where his voice is not heard, that he is a very present help in trouble. Now, there are many ways we think about God. But one sure way should always be love. And there is a place where Mrs. Eddy says where we need to get back to that old-time thinking of God, where he is this loving, kind, benevolent Father. Sometimes it helps at our present stage and growth to feel him that way, and not just as divine consciousness. So, however it helps, and as we grow, I'm sure our concepts of God grow and change as we study the textbook and the Bible. But it's always the 7 synonyms with capital letters. And there are times I feel I need to know God is a loving, kind Father. And I wouldn't want to do anything that would upset him. It helps me to think that. If it helps me, then it can't be wrong. That's how I feel. Now, is he really that way? We know he's not this big Father sitting on a throne. No.
I feel like, this is this loving Father in whose presence there can be no wickedness, rebelliousness, and all these other negative qualities. So that's helpful in that way to think of God this way.
And a very highly spiritualized person, as Moses was.
Noah.
As Noah was, and we think Moses wrote Genesis.
Yeah.
Would grieve at the wickedness that he sees around him or her. It would be grievous to see those around you not getting it. Being their own worst enemies and suffering as a result of their own disobedience. It would grieve somebody. I mean, all of what Moses went through, wandering around for 40 years, the disobedience of the children of Israel, he was grieved. I'm sure he grieved often.
We know Jesus wept. I'm sure that Mrs. Eddy, at times, was very...
Mrs. Eddy wept often, I'm sure.
And especially probably when she foresaw what would happen to what she had brought to the world, in the big stream of things.
Yes. She was also, for some time, the only Christian Scientist, wasn't she? And look what one person did. So we must never despair. It's all in our own thought anyway. We bring in the millennium, our own thinking, our own acknowledgement as the present perfection of God here and now, the New Jerusalem.
Matthew Henry said, God made man noble and provided a good habitation. The change was in man, not God.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes. Yes. Noah's thought ascended. When Noah's thought ascended, he left the old waymarks. of all this rebellious, wicked thought.
Probably Moses wrote this in a language that the people that he was with at the time could identify with, because remember, these were people that were in slavery for 400 years or so before then. And even though there was a remarkable event that they were released through the Red Sea and everything, Moses still had the daunting task of lifting them above this mindset of slavery that they'd been ingrained in. That was a pretty huge task.
It was. Even Mrs. Eddy writes in Science and Health, and I don't have the quote, that, Moses led the people of Israel to worship God in spirit instead of materially.
Yeah.
Not a quote, but that's something.
Yeah, these prophets, their concept of God was ascending and growing as they walked with him and talked with him. Okay, should we move on now?
Oh, actually, I wanted to share something really quick from Science and Health I thought was interesting. It made me look at it differently. Mrs. Reddy writes on page 570, quote, "What if the old dragon should send forth a new flood to drown the Christ idea? He can neither drown your voice with its roar, nor again sink the world into the deep waters of chaos and old night. In this age, the earth will help the woman. The spiritual idea will be understood. Those ready for the blessing you impart will give thanks. The waters will be pacified, and Christ will command the wave." End quote.
Beautiful.
And that's the covenant, isn't it?
Yeah.
The promise. I've often thought of our church as the ark. And I thought of, people 2 by 2 coming from various states and countries. It is. I didn't conjure up that thought myself. I think it was God-given. The right concept of science, which is the ark.
And that's what someone had expressed, not in those terms, but as a comfort, as a place to find comfort. So, with what's on the website and so on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And if you see our definition of ark in the lesson, safety is the idea or reflection of truth, proved to be as immortal as its principle, the understanding of spirit, destroying the belief in matter, God and man coexistent and eternal, science showing that the spiritual realities of all things are created by him and exist forever. It's the ark that we are in.
Yeah, I really like that, because going back and reading Genesis 6:18, "With thee will I establish my covenant, and thou shalt come into the ark." It really gave it a lot of meaning.
Thank you. So thank you, Lynn. And that quote brings it to present day, brings it to now. Very comforting.
Yeah, because Mrs. Eddy went through the same. She experienced everything that Noah and the prophets and almost everything that Jesus experienced, except the actual crucifixion, of course. But she experienced the ridicule, and she persevered. She established what God promised would come. Comfort her. And I remember when we came to this church many, many years ago, it was a good church. Mrs. Evans walked with God. She healed. She had a great love for the science, a great love for Mrs. Eddy. And the flood came in a different way, but it came. And God have something very precious to. It's very humbling to see how prophecy is being fulfilled in our time. And it's very comforting to see how God is taking care of those who are walking with Him.
I thought it was amazing because Noah heard this covenant back in verse 18 of chapter 6. He described all of the years that it took to actually build the ark. Just think, the flood didn't actually come until after the ark was finished. It gives you a picture of the divine hand controlling this all. And what Gary was saying about our church and what we went through, yeah, the flood came. But you know something? That ark of our own was already established. Thank God to Mrs. Evans, who heard the calling and followed it. So when the flood did come, there were those that were carried in this ark, and the line of light continues.
And we certainly were ridiculed. We were told, and I guess to some degree I'm still told we still are, called renegades. Jeremy said if he knew we were called renegades, he would have come sooner. Anyway, we've been called a lot of things, so that's okay. It doesn't hurt us, this word.
Yeah. Maybe a badge of honor.
Yeah, right.
In a way, a badge of honor, I guess.
Well, we're supposed to learn as kids not to be concerned with peer pressure. So
That's it. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure Mrs. Evans, under all of that pressure and for so long, having to bear up under that, and she was the one who it was aimed at. So, as Gary has said, it was not easy being Mrs. Evans. And I'm sure there were many times she wondered if she should turn back or change or what should be done. But she kept pressing forward. And for that, we will be forever grateful.
So, how are we doing, Charlie?
Oh, it's wonderful. Actually, you know, in the beginning when we opened up, I wanted to say welcome to the Ark, but I didn't have enough nerve.
Now you do.
Yes, now I do. All right, question 3. What were the divine instructions given to Noah? Genesis 6:13-14.
Who would read them?
I'll read them.
Thank you.
And God said unto Noah, The end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make thee an ark of gopher wood. Rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch.
Thank you. Anyone want to elaborate?
Well, the first instruction was to get ready for the destruction of all flesh.
I couldn't find a whole lot on gopher wood, but I did read somewhere in the Bible Hub that it was probably like a cypress wood, which was used by the Phoenicians in shipbuilding. And it was a very strong wood.
Thank you.
With regard to the question about getting ready for the destruction, in the lesson it has the definition of Noah as the knowledge of the nothingness of material things and of the immortality of all that is spiritual. And I think that might have to do with that.
Thank you. That's very spot on.
Exactly. We should all be ready for the destruction of all, quote, flesh, shouldn't we? And what does that mean in light of our understanding of science?
Destruction of the human mind and all of its intentions.
And the belief in matter. Go ahead.
And to flood your mind with love, flood tides of love destroys evil and error.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Paraphrase.
science,
Yeah, be ready for the destruction of all fleshly beliefs, all fleshly desires. Does it mean to abuse your body and ignore it? Not take care of it?
No.
No, but there are some people who interpret it that way.
Bad misinterpretation.
Right. It's the understanding of what it all really is, what it represents, body, all of that. It exists in spirit. And all the limitations of matter will fall away as our thought rises. That quote from Mrs. Eddy, if you take away all its life, substance, and intelligence, matter, you can have whatever's left of it.
I also wanted to say about this pitching it within and without. Pitch is something used to plug up all of the holes in the joints so that there's no leaks. And speaking for myself, I know that as I've progressed, error would like to try to find a foothold or a way to sneak in. So the importance of self-examination, which what I think is what pitching is, plugs those holes.
I got the same sense of, preserving the purity of the science. It's like making sure that no holes are there for anything to enter.
Mm-hmm.
Very good, thank you.
That he instructs us to stand porter at the door of thought, right?
Eddie, were you trying to say something?
no, I think everybody got, it's good.
I also got the sense that you need a flood of water to purify as opposed to a gentle rain. I mean, there's so much air. You need the flood to really purify.
That's excellent.
Flush it out.
Yeah.
That goes along with Elizabeth read something to that effect. The flood. Yeah, this flood. It flushes it out. And that's why to be strong in this truth, you can't just have a little trickle of truth. Blood tides of truth and love.
No pacify error.
Yes, it flushes out the impurities.
Plus the trickle doesn't test if you got all those holes.
That's for sure. Thank you.
I was curious also, the age of Noah was 500 years, and the time of the ark was 600 years. And, what a long life. He was spiritually minded. And it was thought that the human existence would only live to like 120. So, and to me, it's like, well, that's actually a blessing to know that eventually the human mind is going to be destroyed completely. And if you're spiritually minded, there's, eternal life, long life.
Well, even the medical profession research has shown that the human body regenerates itself every few years, and that there's no biological reason for the human body to stop working. It's a mental belief.
Yeah.
Anyone else on that question? And they were divine instructions. Thank you, sir. spiritualized instruction.
Yeah, I wanted to add that the pitch, remember, that's what saved Moses also in his little basket.
Yes.
As a baby.
Yeah. As a baby, yeah.
That's right. He was put on in the rushes on the Nile River.
Yeah.
He had a little boat.
Little
Basket boat.
That was a sweet story.
The other
feel
thing,
like-
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I feel like the modern day instructions for us is to continue to do the watches. Like when Jesus said, what he said to watch, and then Mrs. Eddy picked it up and had watches. But I don't know, I just have this sense that our instructions now to continue what Noah did with the ark is to watch.
Thank you, yes.
Very good.
We keep going. We keep, undisturbed amidst the jarring testimonies. Think of all that Noah was observing as he was building his ark, all kinds of wickedness going on. Well, we could claim the same thing if we want to. We just keep pitching away, working on our ark, not condemning anyone, not thinking ill or wishing their destruction, but just knowing this is the truth. If you want to get on this ark, it's a good idea. Go calmly on, as Noah did.
And Matthew Henry said that God employed Noah to build the ark through his faith and obedience, and to teach that none are saved by Christ except those that work out their own salvation.
Yeah, and I thought this was very excellent from Matthew Henry as well. He says, note, when wickedness has become general and universal, ruin is not far off. While there is a remnant of praying people in a nation, to empty the measure as it fills, judgments may be kept off a great while. But when all hands are at work to pull down the fences by sin, and none stand in the gap to make up the breach, what can be expected but an inundation of wrath? Next week, our Bible study is going to be in the remnant. But this is what it's saying. As long as there's a remnant to do this work, which was, who was mentioning? Suzanne, the watches. As long as that's going on, we can put off what would seem to be utter destruction. This is our work.
And what did Abraham say about Sodom and Gomorrah? If there were 10 righteous people, the city would be saved.
Yes, and Mrs. Eddy makes an interesting comment on that. A life or nation, this is a quote from an old journal by Mrs. Eddy, a life or nation is saved in proportion to the predominance within of purity, patriotism, or other right motives. And this is the inner spiritual meaning of Abraham's petition to God. If Sodom City had in it enough moral worth, it would be saved, not otherwise. You think of that. So you go, you be the example, you be the purity, you're the one that's praying and doing the watches, undisturbed amidst the jarring testimonies of the material senses. And also in Miscellany on page 162, Mrs. Eddy says, a small group of wise thinkers is better than a wilderness of dullards and stronger than the might of empires. Never doubt that. Don't ever doubt that. Because that's just what Arrow wants you to do. I don't need to do a watch. I don't need to keep going. I'm tired. I'd rather go to Disney World. Whatever. It wants to take you off this this mark. That's why you make the covenant with God, to keep you on, not just for months, but for years. Think of what Noah did. And as Parthens wrote on that forum, that's how work gets done. That's how it's achieved. Not like the Energizer bunny that pops here and there and everywhere. Try this for a while, try that for a while. Nope, that didn't work. I don't like this. I'm going to do this. I'll do that. Or my family doesn't like that I'm here today, so I'll stay home. This, that, boom, boom, boom. Here we are. Focus. Stay the course. If you care about something besides yourself. Because in the end, that's what the bottom line is. So when I see people come and go and drift and go, I just know that, well, okay, they're more interested in themselves than in than in this work. It takes a lot of dedication and unselfishness. And everyone is capable of it if they love enough. So.
And I think Mrs. Eddy uses patriotism because of the pure sense of it. It's love of one's country, the passion which aims to serve one's country, either in defending it from invasion or protecting its rights and maintaining its laws and institutions in vigor and purity. Patriotism is the characteristic of a good citizen, the noblest passion that animates a man in the character of a citizen. That's Mrs. Ed. I know she doesn't choose anything for no reason.
Careful.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And of course, Mrs. Eddy had great love for our nation, because as we know, it could only have been founded here. And that's just not my opinion. That happens to be factual. It took the liberty and freedom of thought. And we have every right to defend that, not just for ourselves, but for all people everywhere. Freedom. Thank God for freedom. And ultimately the freedom of the human mind. Thank you. That was a beautiful definition.
I think it's misinterpreted often.
Well, it is. It is misinterpreted and turned into something other than that divine interpretation of it. Thank you. So where are we? Are we ready to do the last one?
Sure. Number 4. What happened after Noah built an altar? That's Genesis 8:20 and Genesis 9:1, 8, 9.
Wasn't there a rainbow?
Someone want to read this? Read it, Jeremy?
Sure. 8:20. And Noah builded an altar unto the Lord, and took of every clean beast and of every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar.
Well, again, these great prophets, is the first thing they do. I mean, they probably were hungry. I read that they were in that ark for 370 days. Can you imagine? And that there were 7 pairs of each kind of animals. There were only 8 people. Must have, as we've been talked about, must have been pretty smelly and everything else. They might have had a few other things on their mind that they wanted to eat or make a home or whatever, but the first thing they did, build an altar. First thought they had was for God. Gratitude for God. Is that your first thought?
Yeah, their burnt offering was their gratitude, wasn't it?
And wasn't it their covenant to promise, to be spiritually minded and their covenant with God, to give of themselves and their life to God?
Obedience to God.
The covenant is God. God's promise is, if you follow me and obey me, I'll take care of you.
And you were grateful for that. I think sometimes we all do this after we've had a healing from something so terrible. Then we commit, but then sometimes we fall again along the way. But is that you really have come now with your heart to just follow no matter what?
Yes,
right.
That prayer. Oh, dear Lord, if you'll only heal me of this, I will obey you for the rest of my life. If my marriage is only saved, I will be so grateful. If whatever you've been praying for, and I'll serve you for the rest of my life, then you get it, and whoops. Right back. You go right back.
What happened when Jesus healed the 10 lepers?
Only one came back?
Yeah. One came back. What happened to the other 9? They went
to play.
They weren't grateful.
Yeah, they were grateful, and they got out their golf clubs and had 18 holes of golf.
And also, they were healed, but only the one that came back was made whole.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's good.
Yeah,
Very good point. And when you're just that superficial healing and you haven't truly been made whole, once you're made whole, you can't go back. You cannot go back. There's something in you that just knows you can't go back. It's just the superficial healing where you think you can go back. And you'll find out you might be able to go back for a while, but sooner or later, all those things that once troubled you, they'll come back in spades.
I think there's something in the lesson this week that kind of touches on it, that the little understanding doesn't do it, and that is a greater understanding that brings it all together.
That's why Mrs. Eddy asks the question, are we really grateful for the good already received? She's reminding us that we can't forget our blessings, and then reminds us again that when we do that, we'll have more, and we'll receive so much more for it.
Thank you. But sometimes it's years of not seeing much happening, as in the case of Noah. But he never wavered. And we'll have people that blow this whole story off and say it's not true. But isn't it true they have found the ark? Anyway, we know it is true. It rings true. It's a spiritual, divine story that we can apply to ourselves today.
There's something about it that's true.
Found the ark, but they didn't figure out how to get inside it.
Oh, yeah?
No, I mean...
I saw a video once where, I think it's on Mount Ararat, and there was a great space there, almost equivalent to this, the length and everything. They were measuring, and it sounded like, that's where, I don't know, but it looks so true.
Yeah.
The measurements were the same and everything. The substance of the wood and all this, they were doing all these scientific analysis of it. So.
Yep. Well, it wouldn't have been. It wouldn't be in Genesis, and it wouldn't have been protected and rewritten for thousands of years if there weren't some truth to it.
Yeah, and think of all the lessons that we've gained from today by going into it. And remember, when you have had your healing, the first thing to do is thank God. Get to church on Wednesday. Thank God. Share it with others. Don't forget that. Lord, the human mind, that's wonderful at forgetting everything.
Mm-hmm. And doubting.
And doubting.
And questioning. But I think this idea of being made whole, I think, goes back to the destruction of all flesh. you become whole when you realize the material world doesn't have anything good in it for you. That's when you're made whole. When you're willing to just realize that all of what the material world holds out for you, promises you, it's all false. There's nothing good in it.
Only God is all.
God alone is good. People aren't good. Things aren't good. God alone is good.
So if you find something good,
we're not in matter.
No, and everything good that you have is of God.
Yeah, and it's permanent if you know it, if you know that. So anyone else? Go ahead.
It reminds me of the scientific statement of being where it says not material but spiritual.
Yes.
And after he built the altar, God repeated his covenant with Noah and his children.
And it was interesting, too, because he said that it was, thou shalt be saved and thy house. What does that mean?
All whom your thought rests on.
Yes. In doing this work, I remember once having an argument with someone about this, but in doing this work, when you're faithfully working, your family, those you love, there's a protection there for them. There is. Everyone, it's true, everyone does have to earn it, but you're giving those you love a great blessing. And I do believe it's in the Bible enough times that I have to believe it to be true. Plus, I've observed it to be true.
It is true. I've had.
Thank you.
Any
whole world too. The whole world is helped.
Absolutely. Right. The whole world is helped. There's no thought, no good thought that goes to waste. The whole world is purified by your one. Absolutely. How could it be otherwise? So never doubt these things. They're the truth. And if no one ever doubted, we sure have no reason to doubt. So thank you, Shardy.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us.
Shardy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Call recording off. Goodbye.